In a weight loss plateau, let's break through it together. Welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Fit, the podcast where we unpack the science of sustainable weight loss and fitness for those over 40. Welcome, Twain.
Hey man, what's up?
All good here, all good here. I'm wanting to chat about this topic today called breaking through plateaus in your fitness journey.
Yeah, plateaus are they are a really big thing, right? Like that a lot of people tend to face, especially when they're trying to lose weight.
It is. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have with plateaus is that oftentimes we don't know we're in one.
Yep, that's pretty much the first thing, right? Identifying a plateau. And it's funny because I think a lot of times when people, especially if, let's say if you're doing like some sort of a fat diet, I see this ones with example low carb diets a lot,
Hmm.
where people start off and because low carb diets, for those who aren't initiated, low carb diets, they get you to cut out carbs, right? And because when you cut out carbs, you not only lose a chunk of like the kind of foods that you naturally would eat, but you actually also lose a lot of water in your body as well. So that kind of creates, a dramatic drop in weight that first week. And and a lot of people get, very inspired by that and they're like, oh, cool, this diet works. And then the subsequent week, because they don't lose the same amount of weight, they're like, oh no, I'm hitting a plateau, everything's slowing down. So I think even just identifying and understanding exactly what a weight loss plateau is
Hmm.
super critical because if not, people get frustrated, right? And that's kind of why we lose out in that sense.
So that's probably a great place to start. Is what exactly is a weight loss plateau?
Yeah. So the best way I can describe a weight loss plateau is essentially or rather maybe instead of weight loss plateau, maybe we should be a little bit more technical, and say, let's say like a fat loss plateau. Okay, because the idea of a plateau and why people are concerned about it is because they're not making progress as per what they deem they should be for the efforts that they're putting in. And so when you hit a plateau, it just means essentially that whatever you are doing up until this point is not causing any further change to your body. Yeah. So I think we
Hmm.
can all agree that that's kind of what the plateau would imply. Now, a weight loss plateau, a fat loss plateau, there are little subtle differences between the two. So a weight loss plateau will essentially just be your weight is not really moving. Okay. So your weight staying the same, maybe like you start off the week at 80 kilos and you're like 80 kilos all the way throughout, or fluctuating around there. You're 80 kilos, like, and then 80.1 the next day, 79.9 the next day, the kind of thing, right? You're just fluctuating around. And if you're looking at your average weight, which we will touch on later, but if you're looking at your average weight, you see week on week on week on week, it's the same thing, right? So that essentially would describe, oh, cool, you're in a weight loss plateau. Now, the question is, does a weight loss plateau indicate that you're not making progress? The answer would be it depends, right? Because if you are only using weight as the way to measure your progress, then clearly, yeah, it would mean that you're not making progress because your weight's staying the same. But the fortunate thing is that we don't only use weight to make progress because most people don't just want to lose weight. Like the number on the scale actually doesn't really matter a lot to a lot of people. I've coached so many people over the past like 15 years already at this point. Like everybody always says they want to lose weight. But then when you ask a bit further, they don't actually want to lose weight for the sake of losing weight. They want to do so because there's a specific outcome. They want to be healthier, they want to look better. And I think the aesthetic portion of it is, it's a large driving factor for a lot of people. So in fact, the weight loss itself is not the main thing that they're after. What they are after is that they want fat loss, right? They want, whether you want to look better, whether you want to be healthier. If you're carrying excess fat, getting rid of it is going to be helping you towards those goals. So then, even if you have a weight loss plateau where your weight's staying the same, it's still very possible that you're still losing fat. And we've seen it many times where somebody's weight, stays the same maybe for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. I've had one client who for 8 weeks the weight didn't budge. But almost every week, the waist was going, their waist measurement was going down 0.5 cm. So their waist was getting smaller week on week on week on week. And by the end of 8 weeks, their waist was down about 5 cm, but their weight was still the same. So, so by all measures, they have made progress. And fortunately, because we don't only look at weight as the measure of progress, for them, we were able to make sure that they realize, hey, they're not actually in any kind of plateau. Whatever they're doing was working. It's just that sometimes the body's a little bit stubborn in that sense. Yeah. So if you're hitting a plateau, I think the first step here, as Mike has mentioned, is like we need to identify whether or not it really is an instance where you're not making any further progress, and then what eventually in this episode we're going to talk about what you can do about that.
There's also the emotional aspect, right? Of hitting a
So,
plateau.
yes.
So how do the people actually what's the I don't want to use the word the correct way of dealing with the emotional, but what is some better ways, shall we say, of dealing with that emotional impact, like once you start hitting this plateau?
Yeah, this is kind of a tough one because you can't really control the emotions that you feel, right? You just
Mm.
feel what you feel. But you learn how to respond to them a lot better, and then over time that probably influences like kind of the emotions that you feel, right? So it's a slow process of like conditioning yourself towards that. But I would say that the most important thing at this point in terms of learning how to deal with these emotions and prevent excessive frustration is to identify other progress factors aside from just weight. So
Mm.
don't just look at weight only. Like if you're super attached to just the scale, that's going to be a bad time because again, weight fluctuates day to day. And it fluctuates mainly because of fluid and what we call gut volume, which is, you eat food, it's going through a digestive system, it hasn't kind of been pooped out yet, right? Like there's always food kind of going through your digestive system. And so that adds weight, and it also retains some water. So that's also the water fluctuation component of it as well. So a large part of why your weight fluctuates day to day is just because your body water levels kind of change up and down. And the reason why it changes up and down, there's tons and tons of reasons, most of it's related to some sort of physiological stress. What's causing the stress is, well, it's almost infinite, right? If you are somebody that's easily stressed out, that could easily raise up a little bit of water retention in your body, right? That could affect that. If you didn't get enough sleep the day before, that causes some stress, same thing. So there's all these little factors that can cause weight fluctuations because for most of us, no 2 days are exactly the same, right? They may feel very routine, yes, but no 2 days
Mm.
are exactly the same. Even for myself, somebody that's been, I guess you could class me in the position of being a relatively routine individual doing bodybuilding and all. Even my days aren't the same. I have my 70-80% of my usual meals and all that, but even then, there's still a 20% fluctuation, and that also affects the weight, right? There's some days where, um, I wake up. No, sorry. There's some days where, like, let's say I wake up at, now I'm on a cut, right? I wake up at like 82.9. By the end of the day, when I weigh myself, my weight has fluctuated up to like 84 point something, just from all the water and all the food and everything that I've eaten. If I was so attached to my weight on the scale as a measure of progress, I would already look at it and be panicky, right? Like I would think, oh no, I've undone all my progress. So I think that's really the first step. It's like detaching yourself from the scale and just saying, hey, the scale just measures this one data point. And how do we then make sense of this data point? What we do is we tend to look at it over an average. And I recommend, look at it over an average of like per week. So, or you can even do, like for those of you who are more mathematically inclined, you can do a running average of like 7 days, that kind of thing. In fact, nowadays there are actually apps. There are two really good apps that does that for you. I'm sure if you step on the scale and you have those electronic ones with their own app, like what's it, like a Xiaomi app or something, probably
Mm.
that works as well. But there are two very specific apps that I tend to recommend to people to do this, to track your weight on an average. For the iPhone, it's this app called Happy Scale. And for the Android, it's this app called Libra, Libra. Libra. It's like Libra scale or Libra, something like this. Yeah. Um. So yeah. So you can use these two. You just key in your weight daily, and it will show you a little average of kind of where your weight is, and it just helps you to see the trend. Because at the end of the day, because the weight fluctuates up and down, you cannot get caught up in the day-to-day noise, right? You have to just make sure, hey, am I on track? Am I making progress? So that's really the simplest way. I wouldn't say easiest, but the simplest way to deal with the frustration is learning to detach yourself from the scale and looking at other progress markers.
Right. So it's not the case of like when you see that they're hitting a plateau, reach for the big tub of ice cream because if it's not working, I might as well go down
Oh,
happy.
definitely. Definitely not. It's the same analogy as like if you happen to get a small spot of coffee splashed onto your white shirt, do you just say, oh no, screw it, I'm just going to dump all the coffee on my shirt? Well, it sounds dumb, right, to do that, but but you don't do that, right?
Yeah.
But somehow people seem to justify that with things like diet and all.
Yeah. So that's the thing is I feel like when it comes to the emotional aspect, that is one of the things that always needs to be addressed is that even though you hit a plateau, it's not the end. It's not something for you now to go and derail your journey with, but rather it's something to say, okay, we've hit a speed bump. Now let's work over it and let's continue our
In
progress.
fact, in fact, on that note, very quickly, a plateau is normal. If you're successful at all in your weight loss and changing your body, a plateau is perfectly normal. In fact, if you're not hitting a plateau, sometimes it's a little bit suspicious, you know. Yeah. So for the most part, if you're hitting a plateau once, twice throughout your journey, of course, depending right on the context,
Hmm.
uh, it's a perfectly normal thing. And when you hit a plateau, that's when you need to adjust.
All right. So I find like through my journey as well that I've
Yeah.
gone, um, I find there are a number of things that actually usually affect or come into play when you're going through weight loss.
Yeah.
So one of them you briefly mentioned earlier is the loss of water weight, right? So you've decided like after Christmas, New Year's, your resolution that's coming up, I need to lose all this weight. I'm gonna go through this, and you got your new plan and everything, and you stick to it like I don't know, like a fly sticks to glue or something. I don't know. But from January till January 31st, from you are like fantastic on this diet, right? And
Yeah.
your workout plan and everything. And so you see fantastic gains. Like you can drop 3 kilos just like that.
Yeah.
And then after that, wait, nothing's happening. It's not changing at all. Nothing is moving here.
Yeah.
And I find is like one of the biggest ones for that is usually you've lost the water weight. And that's where you've seen all your big loss from the beginning. So now your real weight loss journey is beginning because now you're actually looking and targeting the fat cells, shall we say. But
Yes.
the next problem that we step into is that the body is highly adaptable.
Hmm.
So whenever we start the journey and we start now making progress on it, and we're eating, say, 300 fewer calories, let's say, after a while, the body is like, okay, I can conserve energy here. I can do this over there, and we can take care of this. No problem. We get a survival instinct and we adapt to this. I think it's called adaptive thermogenesis or something. But the body aligns itself with this new intake. And so after a while, you hit that plateau again. So what do we have to do? Oh, well, now we have to eat less than that again.
Yeah.
And so we go on and on. But each time that you start eating less and less, the body again readapts to it.
Yeah.
And so we always had this running joke. It's like, okay, so when do you stop? You know, after a while, you're eating like 100 calories a day. Like what's going on here? So what would your thoughts be on this particular kind of scenario? You know, when you are looking to lose a weight and you're getting the advice each time to drop the calories, is there a limit as to how much calories you drop? Are there different processes like okay, we go into an actual calorie deficit for X amount of weeks, and after that, let's come back up and refuel the body and then go down. What are your thoughts on all of these kind of points?
Yeah, I think to answer your first question in terms of is there a limit to it? Yeah, I mean, definitely there will be a limit to things um where you can only go so low for so long. And it's not so much a physiological limit in the sense that people assume, hey, I'm only eating 1,000 calories or whatever, and my body's not losing weight, right? Like for example, it's not really a physiological limit because a lot of times what happens in situations like this is that somebody thinks that they are eating that amount, but likely they are because it's self-reported, and this has been shown, time and time again, self-reporting of calorie intake is not accurate. And most people underestimate exactly how much they're eating. Okay. Whether consciously or unconsciously. Most of the time it's unconscious, to be honest. So let's say even people think that they're eating 1,000 calories, they're probably not. They're probably eating something like 1,005,
Yeah,
1,008, around
guilty.
there. Yeah, and then again, that goes back to the question of like, okay, let's say if we then shift into really like tracking things and making sure you're prepping all your meals and all, chances are you'll start to see the progress come again. And you wouldn't even need to be eating 1,000 calories. You could just eat 1,005 and track that to the letter, right? Make sure you're really eating that amount, and you'll start to see everything move again nicely. Now, that being
On that point, if we can just jump in quickly, what in your experience and would you suggest is like the bottoming out, like for men and women in their 40s when
oh,
you want to when people are advising you, oh, drop calories.
yeah.
What would you say is like, okay, this is the absolute minimum. You should never go lower than this.
Oh, this is actually a really good question and something that I recently have been thinking about as well when I look back on all the different transformations that we've done and all the weight loss journeys that I've observed, right? And just getting the data out. So in terms of where people tend to land ultimately in needing to like lose a bunch of weight, right? Most of so I need to preface this by kind of describing the avatar of most of the people. Okay, so most of the
Mhm.
people that deal with their 40 plus and those that are listening are likely to be in this similar avatar. These are people that are not super active. Okay. And when I say not super active, I mean they're clocking anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day. Now, that's might to you, some of you that are listening, that might sound like, oh, wow, that's a lot more active than what I'm doing. Like, sure, yes, totally understandable. And in fact, that's the range we tend to get people to go towards. But the reality is that that's not considered like very active by a physiological standard. Yeah, so that's just the first thing. So they're not very active. Most of them are, let's say, around the 5 to 10,000 range. Some of them are even below the 5,000 range. Okay. Then the other thing is in terms of weight training, a lot of them are just beginners. Okay. And most of them are so busy that they're only training maybe 3 times a week for like 30 minutes or so. Again, for health outcomes and everything, they train like relatively hard as they can. For those like 3 times a week, 30 minutes to maybe an hour, and that's great. For health outcomes, that is you're doing like 80% of the work already. Okay, so that's really good. But in terms of physiological standard, that's actually something very adaptable by the body. So that means that like unless they go up another level in terms of intensity, learning how to really push themselves during the training, get more out of the training, they're kind of like stuck around that range, right? And they'll progress slowly from there. So given this avatar of like what we call a very general kind of working out with weights and then doing a certain level of activity in a day, and then on top of that maybe adding in 1 to 2 sessions in a week of some sort of cardio based activity, maybe actual cardio like running, jogging, whatever, or just going a big hike with friends or doing some sort of sporting activity that they enjoy. This is a very balanced individual, okay? For general health and general well-being. Most of these people end up being in order like to the tail end of their journey where they're getting down into maybe that for men is under 20 is under 15 around 15% of body fat. For ladies, it's probably around like underneath 25% of body fat. For the men, you're probably looking anywhere between 1,400 calories to roughly about 1,800 calories. Like most of the people end up falling around that range. Okay.
Mm.
Uh, and then this is where like, and for ladies, uh, it tends to be roughly around anywhere between 1,000 calories to 1,200 calories. Some ladies even go below that, like eight
Well,
to nine for that period of time where they're towards the end, towards that last quarter of their journey where they're really pushing for additional weight loss. And we
mm,
are trying to get it mostly from the diet side of things. Because again, that's for most people is a little bit more practical just because the time required to go and do extra activity and all is just not so realistic.
mm,
So that's the reality in terms of like where I see a lot of people end up at. And this is why it's so crucial for so many people to really start off not from a perspective of like counting calories and all first. It start off from the perspective of like eating a lot of whole foods, right? Getting your fruits, getting your vegetables, leveling out all the satiety signals, trying to get rid of like your hunger cravings, mute down the food noise in the brain, things like this. Because then when you get into that mode of like, okay, I generally eat quite healthily, then you apply the portion, and like general portion control, then you can apply the calorie counting on top of that and take yourself down to those levels without feeling, we all feeling hunger that's like totally unmanageable and something that's not tolerated at all by the average person. Yeah, so those are really the kind of levels we tend to see, to be honest. And the funny part about this is that also, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're wondering like, oh man, that sounds super low, this crazy, whatever. Take note that there's tremendous range of like variability So this I'm talking about like this is the general range in which I see maybe 80% of people fall within. There are people, 10% on both sides that, they can lose very easily on like way higher. There are people on the other side, which is sad to say, they have to go even lower than that.
Well,
Uh, yeah. So physiologically, the limits actually aren't very high, in terms of the weight loss component. Yeah, for most people, because the body, and that is a testament to the body's adaptability,
mm.
to be honest. Yeah. Um, yeah, do you have any questions on that first? Because there's another point on this I wanted to share, which I think is quite interesting for those people listening.
Okay, no, I think continue.
Yeah, so the other part to this is that there actually seems to be, without sounding like a racist, there actually seems to be a difference in the nationality and the racial background of the individual and how tolerable they are to the level of dieting. And what I've noticed is that, funnily enough, a lot of like Southeast Asian people, actually Asian people in general, a lot of like maybe African American descent people. I haven't worked a ton with like a lot of African Americans, so I cannot really speak broadly. But I've talked to other coaches that have, and they seem to kind of corroborate with the same ideas as well. Is that the adaptation of their bodies and their metabolism seems to be a bit higher than, let's say, somebody from a more Anglo-Saxon kind of descent. So a lot of like the Westerners tend to be able to like lose weight a little bit easier on lower calories compared to somebody that's of either African American descent or even like the Asian descent. And I suspect a lot of this is more to do with, just thinking about the ancestry and the history and the nature of like, okay, what is the region previously like? What's the kind of abundance of food available, the adaptability, things like this, in certain areas, geographical areas of the world. And also, if you think about, let's say, like in the European side of things, there was a heavier abundance on maybe like higher proteins or meats, a bit more abundance of foods in the kind of sense compared to, let's say, somewhere in Asia where there's a lot more abundance or dependence on like agriculture and feeding off of like more like fruits, more like plants and maybe just fish, not as much meat based kind of a diet. So this is all just speculation, and but this is just patterns you tend to observe and notice. And so fortunately a lot of the a lot of the clients that I train are pretty open-minded so that they don't take offense when I say things like this, because I understand it can be easy to take offense, but I'll just let them know like, hey, this is what I observe, and sometimes it just happens to be the case. Now, that being said though, I do notice that there's some Asian women, right, that actually have decently high metabolisms. But these ladies are a little bit towards the maybe like 20-30% of the group sample that I have. And they can, and so like the way we would get them to eat and balance out their macros would be just slightly different. So like some of these ladies, they can really take really high carbs. We can keep them like relatively low fat, really high carbs. A moderate amount of protein is good enough, for them, and they can do really well on that. So there's all these little factors that, obviously kind of differentiates everybody. But back to the point here, I think the bottom end range of the calorie range is basically what I just mentioned. For ladies, anywhere between 1,000 and 1,002 is probably where most people end up. And then for men, it's anywhere between 1,004 and 1,008 tends to be where most people end up.
And that's the bottoming out, right? That's not where they actually stay with the entire diet.
No, no, no. There's
Uh,
like towards maybe
yeah.
I mean, for some, it might be earlier around the halfway point of their diet. Again, all these points, because some people need to lose like a
Yeah.
lot more than other people, so it
Yeah.
really depends.
I just feel it's an important distinction to make because I've chatted with quite a few people.
Yeah.
And one of the first things they'll always say is, "Oh, okay, I need to go like some of them. I need to go on a juice cleanse." Others are like, "Oh, we need to drop our calories down to 1,000 calories per day." And I'm like, but how many calories does your brain use on its own compared to your body?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
all
here's
these
the
kind of
thing.
things. Hmm. So I think it's an important distinction to make is that the 1,000 to 1,200, like for women, and the 1,400 to 1,800, it's not your entire diet, but rather it's like once you're getting to the end and you want to get rid of that final stubborn fat that's just not going away, these are the ranges that you end up in, right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
Yeah, for the most part. So then the next role that also comes into play here is muscle mass, right? Muscle mass plays
Yeah,
a very distinct role in your fat loss journey too. Like
yeah,
I'm very happy to hear my wife now when she talks about her journey. Her goals are no longer I need to lose 5 kilos, but her journey is like, oh, I want to put on muscle mass. Where
yep,
before, when I used to talk to her about these kind of things, she's like, well, I don't want to do gym because I don't want to build muscle. I'm like,
yes,
but
yes.
you're getting older. You know? Sometimes this muscle mass is required. And so she's now sort of come around to that kind of mindset. And so that's now her goal is that she has a set amount of muscle mass that she wants to put on.
Yeah, yeah.
How would you discuss this kind of like what role would muscle mass actually play in body
Oh,
composition
It's
and weight
it's
loss?
easily the most important role in I mean obviously in body composition you want more muscle so that comparatively you also have less fat and your body to a point your body functions really efficiently and really well because you feel stronger, you tend to move around more when you have a bit more muscle and strength. um but the for a weight loss plateau itself, right? Like or a fat loss plateau, the more muscle you have, the higher the capacity for you to break through that plateau. Let's put it that way. Because again, remember muscle is a lot, it's a metabolically active tissue. So there's a certain amount of like, calorie burn that you actually do get from it. It's not as much as people think though, because I think a lot of times people will say, hey, if I get more muscle means I burn more calories. I mean, yes, but actually the difference in terms of muscle versus like fat, like you're talking maybe something like if I remember correctly, per pound of muscle, I could be getting the units wrong, but per pound of muscle is or maybe even kilo of muscle, it's like 17 calories extra that you're burning per kilo of muscle.
Like
Okay.
not
And
even an apple.
yeah, but for those of you who are not aware, like even putting on a kilo of muscle is a challenge, right? Especially the older you get. So it's not so much about the direct, like, okay, the muscle has this huge extra volume of calories it's burning, but it's more about the fact that when you have a lot more muscle, you feel stronger, you move around a lot more, and you get a lot more out of your movement. That's where it compounds. So when you do more exercise, when you have muscle and you actually going to do like even just basic cardio activities, right? You're actually generating a slightly higher caloric burn because you're being a lot more you're getting a lot more done at the activities that you when you're doing them. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So that's kind of how it plays into the equation and helping with like facilitate a bit more of that fat loss and all of that. Yeah, but in terms of just health, I mean, like obviously you do want to have muscle because if you don't use it, you kind of lose it, right? And as you get older, what's the number one cause of like old folks dying? It's actually literally just like having a fall and then being immobilized and then just withering away after that.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
a ton of it is quality of life issues where, because they are so brittle and fragile without having any muscle, in the old age, that's what starts that ball down that hill.
true. And I think that there was a study that was actually shown that said is like the one of if you have to generally give the number one thing for longevity of life, it's actually down to muscle mass,
Yes.
which I thought was
I
quite
think
interesting.
Yeah, but I think also it's important to establish here when we talk about muscle mass. I think the idea that the images that conjure in people's minds are like bodybuilders and you
Not
know,
exactly Ronnie
uh,
Coleman.
yeah, like Ronnie Coleman flexing all the muscles and being
Yeah,
like muscle bound and stiff and huge like the Hulk. When we talk about muscle mass, we're not talking about that at all because number one, those represent a very, very, very extreme level of musculature. It's like painting all drivers as F1 drivers.
they're not.
All drivers are yeah. I mean like every time people tell me like, oh, uh I don't want to lift weights, because I'm scared to gain muscle. I don't want to get too big. I
Yeah.
think like, the easiest way to analogize that to people is like, oh, so are you scared of getting too rich from going to work? I mean, for some people it's a very big reality, right? Like yeah, maybe they are such high flyers or whatever, and then they go to work and but if you ask them about that, they'll tell you, no, I work damn hard, right? Like I put in the hours, I do. Yeah, so you actually have to put in effort to really gain muscle. So you should try to gain muscle because even if you do go to work and you work very hard, you're not likely to get rich just from that,
Hmm.
right? You still have a lot of other factors that to kind of consider. So it's the same thing. It's not easy at all to gain muscle because your body does not want to for the most part. I mean, beyond a certain level, it doesn't want to. If you're already under muscle, it's quite easy for your body to gain it up to the average level. But average level just means skinny-ish and lean, yeah, not even like boy band cover if you're a guy or something. Yeah. And of course there's the genetics component to it. Some people just have a little bit more proclivity to building some muscle mass, right? But that tends to be like you will know if you are somebody like that. You will look muscular and you will be relatively muscular. You won't be like chubby and fat.
But again, it's a very small percentage of the population.
It's such a small percentage. Oh,
So I
but it
think,
tends it
yeah,
tends to group. I mean, we're all going too off track. It tends to group within like certain populations as well. So you're talking about like islanders, like the Maori,
yeah.
the Tongans, the Samoans, all these guys. Like, of course, you see a lot of them as I put quote unquote fat, but a lot of them are just so huge and well built and
Mm.
muscled up. It's
That's because
crazy.
they eat a whole bucket of fried chicken by themselves.
No, man, it's already in their genetics, and then the lifestyle facilitates that stuff.
Yeah,
I've
they're
seen like
huge.
teenage like Maori guys over here in Australia go into the gym and I chat with them and they said, "Oh yeah, it's my first time coming into the gym," like kind of thing.
Deadlifting
Yeah,
220.
yeah, and then they're just like on the bench straight away, 100 kilos. That's it, like as though it's nothing, and you're like, geez, man, these guys are like forklifts, if they were human, so
That's
it's
true. That's
pretty
true. All right, so I
amazing.
think one thing we always need to just emphasize here when we're going through the journey is you did touch on it in the beginning, is the importance of patience. When you're going, because plateaus are an I don't want to say it's a necessary part, but it's a very common part, and it's a very
Yeah.
required part, we could say, of a weight loss journey. As you go down, you always, if you, as you said, if you're doing everything correctly, you have to hit plateaus at some or other points. It's just
Yeah.
part of the journey. And it's to know that there's the patience to go through that. And then it's the um, way of educating yourself as to, okay, what's next? And this is, as Twain's not really said, but has shared, is this is a great place for coaches to come into play. Because
Yeah.
oftentimes when you hit a plateau, you either get one, the emotional aspect takes over, and then you just go and you're looking, okay, what's Thor's latest workout? And that's now what you're going to implement rather than looking, okay, where else am I doing anything wrong here? Is it my diet? Is it my daily activity? What other things could I actually look at first? And this, as I say, is where having a good coach who's objective, looking from the outside in, can really advise you on next steps. So for those who don't have the opportunity to go for a coach, let's discuss some of the strategies that people can actually implement when they are reaching a plateau. So one is obviously they can reevaluate their diet, right? Is it a time now where let's drop another 200 calories, 200 to 500 calories for 2 weeks and see how that goes? Can we maybe look, okay, we haven't actually been exercising very intense, maybe we can up that and see, okay, if we bring in instead of 2 workouts a week, let's go for 5 workouts a week and see if that's going to help break through. Or maybe is like we're doing too much hit workouts, perhaps
Mm.
bringing another component in like strength training that focuses primarily on that to build some muscle mass. Maybe
Yeah.
that's going to help to also rejig your journey,
Yeah.
and give a bit of a shock to the system so that the body needs to readapt to that again.
Yeah.
I mean, these are again dependent on what your goals are, where you are in your journey, and all these kind of things. These are some of the things that people could possibly look at. But what would be your specific tips that you would give uh,
Cool.
for
Um,
people?
I, I think the couple categories of things that you mentioned to do are quite good. So I want to touch on those. Prior to that, very quickly, you must assess whether you're in that plateau or not, right? And again, I'm assuming everybody here wants to lose fat and not just lose weight, and they want to look, either look good or it's a health purpose thing. Again, you want to lose fat. And so according to that, how do you assess whether you're in a plateau? Well, the first thing is you need to see, okay, has my weight, my average weight, again, so you're taking a weight every day and you're looking at the average week on week, has it moved down at all? Okay, if it has not moved down at all over the past 2 weeks and it's floating around that same range, right? So you're talking about, let's say, usually we use anywhere between like a 1% range over the a 0.5% range over the past 2 weeks to determine whether or not you're in a plateau. So what that means is, let's say if you're 100 kilos on average, and the next 2 weeks you're either 100.5 or you're 99.5, for example, then your weight hasn't really moved very much. Okay, so cool. That's the first box that you tick. Okay, my weight hasn't moved much for 2 or even more weeks. Now let's look at the next progress tracker. The next one would be your waist. Hopefully you are taking your waist measurement as well. So if you're taking a waist measurement, it's been going down, then you're not in a plateau. Continue doing what you're doing. Okay, so if your waist has been kind of going down, maybe 0.5 cm each week, or even if it has been the same measurement for a week, that means, like, let's say this week you measured 90 cm on your waist, the next week you measure 90 cm, and then the week after that you measure 89.5 cm, for example, you're still making progress, because sometimes the body takes a little while to adjust, or sometimes when you're measuring the waist, it's changing, but there's a little bit of bloatedness, small things like this. So again, you can see generally we're within that 2 weeks time frame of assessing whether or not you're in a plateau. Because if you just take it from 1 week only, what could be happening is your body's still trying to undergo the change. And if you try to change something drastically, it disrupts that potential change and you kind of shortcut yourself out of some of those results. Again, the principle is you want to go with minimum viable dose, right? So if you were to go into a doctor, perfect example is you go to the doctor, they're not going to give you a whole ton of medication straight away. They assess you and figure out all these things first, and then say, okay, let me start you off on this dosage for your situation. In fact, they'll be sued for malpractice if straight away they just dump, like, 3 or 4 different drugs at the highest doses, right? Like, that's not going to make sense. So it's the same thing with assessing something like this, obviously to a much simpler degree. And so you have to assess whether you're in a plateau. Let's say if your waist is not going down, your weight's not going down over the past 2 weeks, everything's still pretty much exactly the same within those range I talked about, then yes, you probably want to start making some changes. Now, the changes that Mike mentioned are really good. First one I usually will start with is reevaluating your diet. Okay, have you actually been on point with your diet? That's the first thing I would ask. And I don't mean like I generally eat quite healthy. I never really snack much. There was only maybe that 1 or 2 days this week. Okay, if you're starting to talk like this, that's a red flag. That's a red flag because you have no idea. You're basing on your memory. And so if you're basing on your memory, you're not going to be very successful in that. Okay, because number why? Because you're not going to be objective. And that's the nature of it. Human beings' memories are just terrible. Okay, that's established true and true. So what you want to do first of all is, like, for this next week, really plan ahead and stick to your current calorie amounts. Plan that ahead. Okay. If you are sticking to that 6 times out of the 6 days out of the 7 days, and maybe the seventh day you have like a bit more of a free meal, right? So maybe your breakfast and lunch is the same, then dinner maybe you have a different meal. That probably will be a better indication of, like, okay, are you really in a plateau? Because the reason why I mention this is because I've seen it happen so many times. Literally 50% of the times that clients have come to me with, like, I think I'm in a plateau. We just do this for 1 week and I follow up with them. Honestly, within the next 3 or 4 days, they really start to see the weight go back down again. Just by being that much strict habits, being observant about making sure each meal they're getting the correct balance of foods that they're supposed to eat. Yeah. So that's already the first thing. Now, the next part to that will be, cool. Let's say you are tracking everything and you're doing really well. Then where is your current, like, level of calories? If your calories, let's say if you're a guy or you're a girl, and they fall within the ranges that I mentioned. So for guys, anywhere between 1,004 to 1,008, girls anywhere between 1,000 to 2,200, then what you want to do is you probably don't want to adjust your diet yet. You probably want to look at your exercise components. Yeah. And this is where we'll go to the second part, which is what Mike just now mentioned, increasing your exercise intensity. So a lot of times, if you're just dieting down only on nutrition and your exercise component, you're not really moving very much, right? In terms of general activity levels, like how many steps are you clocking in a day, or you're not actually getting in any actual exercise sessions, that's probably where you want to start doing that. Okay, increasing the exercise, I wouldn't say intensity per se, maybe it's increasing the volume of it, doing more activity first and foremost. All right, so then that will be the next step, which is, you know, anywhere into that 5 to 10,000 range. So if you're below 5,000 range, definitely bring it up past 5,000 first. If you are within the 5 to 10,000 range, can you bring it up closer to the 10,000 range? I would say for most people that I've trained, as busy as they are, that the 10,000 is still relatively doable. It takes effort, but it's relatively doable. Although most people, I've never really needed them to get like all the way up to 10,000. Most people around 8 to 9,000 are pretty good already. Like they're hitting quite a good level of activity. The key to it is to just make sure you do all the little things that you can, so you're not taking extra time. For example, it's just stopping the bus stop before, if you're taking the bus and then you walk home from there, taking the stairs instead of taking the lift, taking the stairs instead of taking the escalator. All these small things, they will add up. Every couple minutes, when you take a break from your work, right? You stand up, walk around, walk to water cooler, walk back. All these things will add up. So that's the next thing, right? Bringing up the exercise amount that you're doing. And then if you're not doing any actual exercise workouts, that's probably where you want to then start. So if you're not doing any workouts at all, start doing some sort of workouts. Even if they are HIIT style workouts or whatever. You don't have to be too specific about them, to be honest, as long as you're getting in some sort of workouts. Okay. After you add that in, or let's say if you're already doing that, then like Mike mentioned, yes, you probably want to start incorporating some sort of structured serious strength training. So you can see the way I'm going about this, I'm giving you levels to it. And the idea is you want to just go to the next level rather than skip ahead to like the level, 2 or 3 levels above. Because again, minimum viable dose, just use the right adjustment to get you pushing over into the next series of progressions. And then from there, then you push again, to the next series progression. That way you can do it very sustainably. It's much easier to build up, and you're just gonna be able to smash your way through the plateaus much better. So yeah. So I think that's what I have for the moment. Any questions on that, do you think? Mike, any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I think those pretty much sum up a lot of those. But what about like calorie intake, protein intake?
Okay. So like macronutrient distribution, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that one goes back to the dietary side of things. Um, if you're not eating a lot of protein, I would suggest uh definitely bump up the protein intake first. A lot of times just keeping the calories the same and rebalancing it out such that, yeah, people eating a higher protein intake already starts to push people in the right direction. So let's say we're eating 2,000 calories, but you're only getting in 60 grams of protein, which I see all the time with a lot of people. Yeah, just changing that 60 grams to 100 grams makes a pretty big difference already. Yeah. The general rule, and we've done that episode on protein, is optimal amount is like 1 gram per pound, right? Or 2.2 grams per kilo. So if you're 100 kilos, then that's 220 grams of protein. That's roughly like the max amount that you want to take. And then the bottom end range of that is about 0.6 grams per pound. So if you're 100 kilos, that's 100 and
60.
no 120, I think.
Oh. Oh,
Point
oh,
zero
you mean
point six.
the bottom? Right.
Yeah. So roughly about 120, 130 grams of protein. Yeah. So that's, you can go back and reference that episode for more details there on setting up your protein intake. But yeah, getting more protein in would be a great first choice without adjusting the calories. Then let's say if your protein's already within those ranges, even maxed out at the upper end of the range, what I'll recommend then is, yeah, you probably want to reduce your calories then. How much to reduce by? Usually anywhere between 100 to 200 calories is a great amount. Um, Sometimes people recommend like a percentage kind of thing. I think it doesn't seem to matter too much because most of the time people end up around that. It's still a pretty narrow range, right? Talking about 1,000 calories intake all the way up until maybe 2,200 calories. So within this range of intake, just dropping another 100, 200 calories is probably a simpler way to go about it.
So it's not the usual advice of 500.
No. So when you're starting off your diet, you probably want to start after you have established how much you're taking in. And again, this goes back to making sure you know what's the amount of calories you're taking in, right? And then when you start from there, you want to see, okay, how can I try to get in a deficit of anywhere between 500 to maybe even 800.
Hmm.
The traditional, recommendation of trying to get about 500 calories deficit, in my opinion, is actually a little bit on the lower side because number one, most people are going to try to do it almost entirely from the diet. And when you do that, it actually impacts some of the other aspects of your energy expenditure. Because when you remove the amount of food that you're eating, it actually affects your thermic effect of food, right? Which is on the expenditure side of things. When you remove the amount of food that you're taking in, your NEAT tends to go down. So you might fidget less, you might do all these stuff less. And NEAT is not steps. Steps is still very active. Okay, that's considered under the active component of things. Needs are things that you don't think about and you do. So it's like fidgeting, shaking your legs. Yeah. Even like just getting up and moving around a bit more unconsciously is something that happens with people who have like more excess energy versus lower energy. Your body's great at conserving and managing these things on its own without you controlling it. So all these things, because they reduce that down, now your output side of things actually drops down. That means the number which you started with your maintenance actually now is lower just from reducing food. Now that number kind of goes lower as well.
Hmm.
And so you're no longer in that so-called 500 that you think is deficit. Yeah. So my recommendation is try to get about a 5 to 800 calorie deficit in a combination from both the food and the activity side of things. Now, the activity side of things, like exercise is still a great way to add to the deficit. But you don't want to make the mistake that a lot of people make, which is they say, I'm just going to run off all the weight, right? Because if you're not watching the diet side of things, that can easily eclipse any kind of running that you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really attacking it from these two ends. And then those are the numbers I would suggest and the ranges I would recommend.
Uh, so I would give 2 points. One is I've never been a fan of this 500 calories. The general advice of you must drop 500 calories each time. The reason being is because the reason you're dropping is so that you can see progress. Now, the difference between all of us is that, our bodies respond differently to certain amounts, as you've correctly suggested. And this is the part that I always love about working with Twain on this, is that you work with the minimum dosage, as you as you say. So if I'm quite a large lad, shall we say, then I want to now start losing weight.
Mm.
The amount that I need to shock my system is a lot less than somebody who's been training and who's been dieting, in order for them to shock their system to see progress in losing weight. I'll give you an example, is that I have actually gone through where I started out after a long period and I only dropped 100 calories, right? And from dropping the 100 calories like that, I actually saw myself losing weight because there was the difference from my consumption that I was taking in. Obviously, yes, okay, I also added in the exercise component, but diet wise, all it required for me to start my weight loss journey was dropping 100 calories. So, what is 100 calories? It's like 3 apples, right? To put it into the context here. So, like dropping 3 apples in my eating habits. And so I started to see like that. Then, okay, 100 is no longer working for me. All right, let's see what else we can do. Maybe we can drop 100 more, or we can drop 200. We see how it goes. Now, why I love this kind of way of eating is that it's not as restrictive as general diets.
Yeah.
Like when people come to me, as an example here, and they say, oh, they want to lose weight. And I say, okay, all you need to do, go into a calorie deficit of 500 or 800 calories. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, so I cannot eat this, cannot eat that, cannot eat this. Yes. You want to lose weight, you must not eat any of that. Don't even look at any of that, because if you look at it, you put on weight. And so there's a fault in that, because if you really want somebody to go on it's like we usually think of ourselves as boats, right? But actually, we're not boats. We're more like ships. Maybe there's like, again, 2% of the population that's boats. Now, what do I mean by this? This
Yeah.
means that if I'm traveling on the boat and I'm going forward, for me to actually make a deviation or a turn, if I'm in a boat, it's very simple. I can just jig that way and off I go. And I can maintain course and continue on. But for the majority of the population, we're more like ships. So as we're going forward like that, we're traveling, traveling, traveling. We say now, okay, we want to change here because we want to get a different outcome. We have to veer slowly, of course, and continue to ensure that we continue going forward.
Yeah.
If we make that quick change like that, it's like the New Year's resolution people, you know? Oh, I wanna lose weight. I want to be in the gym. And then for 3 weeks, I'm fantastic in the gym. And then after that, I miss one workout here. Then that leads to 5 workouts missed. And next thing, by February, I'm not working out anymore. Right.
Yeah.
But bringing in and making the small changes and then tracking the progress as you go along helps to motivate you even more because, yes, I'm only making small changes. So it's nothing to brag about to my friends because I only made this small change, but I'm seeing progress.
Yeah.
Now, my progress in my first month might not be as big as some people, but mine might be more sustainable and will keep me going for a longer period. And I find that that's a large distinction that a lot of people overlook when they're going on their loss journey. And I think it's valid though because maybe a lot. Let's actually put it down to a lot. Fall into the summer body diet. You know, like I've gone through the winter and I put on the belly. Now summer is coming up. I want to go to the beach. And so I have a very short amount of time for me to lose this weight so that I can look better when I go to the beach. Okay. So that one is like, go for it. Drop your 500 to 800 calories straight away if you want. But if you're looking at doing it for a healthier, longer, sustainable time, I'd rather adhere to what Twain's advice here is go for the minimum that you need in order to spark progress. And then the other point, I just want to speak to your point there is saying like you can't outrun a bad diet. And so the other component that people don't take into account when you actually go running, if you haven't been running for a long period of time, is that once you start going and trying it out, the shock to your body is so immense that when you're done running, you're like one, so thirsty. And then two, the follow up to that, you just become so ravenous. It's like you just want to eat everything in sight. And then the things you want to eat is not necessarily, as you were pointing out, whole foods. But you see,
Mhm.
like, oh, here's the biscuits or the cookies, or here's the cake that's readily available. Oh, let me eat that. Let me eat that. And
Yeah.
two handfuls of food, and you've already surpassed the calories that you burned during your run. So I
Yeah,
find
man.
that's
It's
the issue is like there's the after effects of the run that people always need to take into account as well when they go and factor these into their their weight loss journey.
yeah. Yeah. The I think you put it there really, really well, which is the smaller the adjustment you can make, um, the easier it is to actually implement and stay consistent with it. And that's really where the results come. The results come from just the being consistent and, you know, chipping away at it. It's like the idea of the water drop on the rock, right? Like it keeps hitting the same place, and that's why it carves the stone eventually. Obviously, it's not going to take the same way like 1,000 years. But the idea here is just consistency is kind of where the results come. It's not about any magic one stop thing that you do because the results don't come overnight. No, no one meal or one workout suddenly makes you healthy or stronger immediately.
Yeah.
Right? You actually have to recover from it and then you actually have to subject the body to it again. And then you do it long enough, the body gets the idea of like, oh God, okay, yeah, sure, okay, I'll change. Because the body doesn't want to, and that's again testament to our survivability. The reason why human beings are here and we have survived for so long is because our body can adapt really well to ridiculous, ridiculous circumstances. Like we've been talking about dieting, right?
Mm.
I was for those who are not familiar, Being from Singapore, I was in the army, so I was in the military for a bit. We all have to serve it. It's a conscription thing. But I was thrown into one of the ground stuff that I needed to do, which is I was in the infantry, and as part of the like course training and everything, we had to do this jungle course. And this jungle course was just shy of 2 weeks in the jungle where there's a lot of like different tasks and stuff we have to accomplish. And they give us, it's a jungle survival course, so they give us a 1.5 days worth of ration for the entire 2 weeks. Okay. So we have to survive on that. And yes, we are told there are certain things in the jungle, we are taught how to kind of like pluck those and eat those. For the most part, most people don't do that. I end up plucking some leaves, I found some wild ginger, small things like this. But yeah, like you have to survive on that little, and that really opened my eyes to like, hey, cool, my body can actually do a lot more than I thought it could. We came off that. I actually didn't lose a ton of weight because for me at that point I already had lost a ton of weight going into the army, because before army I was like 92, and then by the time I finished my basic military I was already at like 76, 75, and then by the time I went for this course I was like 74. I ended this course at maybe 71. you know so yeah, so your body can adapt and it will conserve and it will figure out and resist the changes that you want it to undergo. So you have to be more consistent, and you have to be more mindful of it. You have to control your body in the same way that, like, it's almost a separate thing from you. If that makes sense. Yeah, and that's why we offered all these very objective ways for you to assess things, for you to, make your moves and figure out what to do.
The other point I also just want to bring up is that we all think like each of these things is the holy grail, right? So
Oh
if I
yeah.
go and I start running 5Ks, that means I'm going to lose weight. But every one of these different things is just like a tool in your toolbox of weight loss,
Yeah.
right? The diets, let's call it a screwdriver, the running, let's call that a hammer, the cardio exercise or the strength training, let's call them a screwdriver, and all these different things. And each one has a different part that it plays in the weight loss journey. It's not one that's better than the other or the one that's the best, and so on and so on. But they each have a part to play in this toolbox of weight loss. And that was something that I had to also wrap my head around as I went on the thing, because I was one that was always, okay, you just eat well and you just exercise.
Yeah.
But those two concepts are quite broad. Once you start looking at the things, there's different ways to um, spark different progress whenever you hit the relevant plateau. All right, I think we've hit most of what we wanted to chat about. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Dwayne?
No, I think we covered most of the stuff that we were intending to.
Okay, awesome. So I would just end by saying is, remember, hitting a plateau is a normal part of the weight loss journey. It's about how you respond that matters. Stay patient, persistent, and focus on progress, not just the numbers on the scale, but look at all the other factors that Twain mentioned earlier. And for more tips and support, remember to check out our website at 40plusfit.com. And don't forget to follow us and share this episode with anyone who needs a little extra motivation to keep going. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks, everybody. See you.